Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be talking a little bit about the box office. I did a full box office breakdown over on the Geeks and Gamers channel, so make sure you go check that out if you want to find out more about all the movies that came out this week and where they are standing. But I'm going to be focusing on a few movies in particular because they were ones I had mentioned previously, and they are the Rhythm Section and Gretel and Hansel. And so the Rhythm Section, based on the numbers that we currently have, and this just right now for the moment includes the domestic numbers because oftentimes these numbers take a little bit longer to come out. As you see, we have not gotten any of the official foreign numbers yet for this movie, and so this number very well could change, but it's not likely going to change by a whole lot, seeing that I don't really see the Rhythm Section being a film that's going to really, appease the foreign audiences. I just don't think that a lot of people are going to go out of the way in the foreign markets to go see a movie about a woman who loses her family and then trains to become an assassin, but you wouldn't know that because the movie is titled The Rhythm Section, which, as I've mentioned previously, is probably one of the worst titles you could ever give to a movie, and I think is probably the biggest reason why that film is going to end up flopping, which right now it seems to be the case, because with that $2.8 million, it is sitting at negative $73.3 million, meaning it's working right now in the red, and most films are able to make this money up over time. But seeing that it has already such a slow start, even if this movie only drops about 50% or so between now and next weekend, that means it'll only make another $1 million or so in the coming week, which to me is just really sad and pathetic overall. And it's really sad because I don't have any big issues with Blake Lively. I don't have any big issues with her as an actress, but it is interesting to me that they focus this story on a female character who is, again, trained to become a badass assassin. And I've actually been told from people who've reviewed the film that it does so not treating her like a Mary Sue, where she actually does fail a lot. She never becomes perfect at her gig or at her job. She's struggling constantly, but that the movie is just weighed down by a lot of really slow narrative, and also just a lot of random fight sequences that don't really match up very well either. So it doesn't really surprise me all that much that the film is bombing the way that it is. But to me, the biggest story is the fact that we have yet another massive bomb to start off 2020. I thought that it was already bad enough that we had films like Underwater, which is currently still at negative $76 million. Again, a loss of $76 million. I thought it was bad when we had other films like Doolittle, with a negative $186.5 million loss, which is likely not going to stop anytime soon. Again, the best case scenario for that movie, best case scenario, is that it loses $150 million. And so we already have that film losing money. You also have films like The Turning, which is a horror film that is not doing nearly as well as many horror films tend to do, which is sitting at negative $12 million. Most films, horror films at the very least, at this point in their run, usually have made up their money at this point in time, but this movie, for some reason, is not. It costs $14 million to make, which is a little bit more than your typical horror film, but even then, it's not making nearly enough to make up for that loss, and so we'll have to wait and see what those numbers are once we get the foreign totals, the foreign market numbers in a little bit later today, as those continue to roll in. But with Rhythm Section, we have another loss, which puts the current box office of 2020, just looking at the new releases, the films that were released in 2020, at a negative category. The films have not made any money at the 2020 box office. It is currently in the red. And that's really bad. And I know that, January films tend to do that way, where they just don't really do nearly as well in the box office. But not even success stories like Bad Boys for Life, or the eventual success of other films like, for example, of 1917, which again is a holdover technically from 2019, are going to, I think, be able to really make up for just that massive loss. And here's the big thing. Even if you were to take into account holdovers from 2019, I don't think it would be able to make up for the loss of Doolittle, because it is just so high. However, one film that probably will not be adding to that negative category in a very surprising turn is Gretel and Hansel, which, yeah, it's not doing crazy good numbers, but it did $6 million in the domestic marketplace this weekend. So that's before any foreign numbers, doing much better than the Rhythm Section. And because the film only cost $5 million to produce, yeah, talk about low budget, not spending any money, trying to make a quick buck. This is the pure example of that. And because they've made $6 million, it's currently sitting at negative $3.8 million after its first week, which is actually pretty good. That's about standard for what a lot of horror films tend to do, unless it's a giant, massive behemoth that makes up its money in its first weekend after a low budget. This is pretty standard. So this tells me that even with a 50% drop, by next weekend, this film will probably have either reached profitability or would have gotten very, very close. Again, all that depends on the foreign totals, and we'll get those in a little bit later today. But the fact that we have Gretel and Hansel, which in my opinion should have been the biggest flop out of all these movies because of just the story itself, it just goes to show you that you can make a story and you can have it focus more on political narratives. You can change the names of the characters, or rather change the order of the title of the classic story of Hansel and Gretel for a political reason, and you can still make money off of it if you put little effort, little time, and little money into it. It just goes to show you that any movie, it seems, can actually make money. Any movie can make money if you put in no money into the project, which kind of makes it hilarious, the fact that you have films like Gretel and Hansel and other films like it, like The Turning even, for example, even though it's still negative, it might stay negative. The fact that you have movies like this that have made more money than a Star Wars movie, because remember, Solo lost money. Solo lost $180 million in revenue. It's insane to think about when you really put things into perspective. $180 million in net loss for that movie. And yet you have films like Gretel and Hansel, which is going to be profitable in the black by the end of its run, and The Turning, which will at least get very close to that number to break even, getting to the black. It's just insane and just really spat. And I did a whole breakdown of where that film currently falls. So Rise of Skywalker has indeed crossed around $1.06 billion for anyone that is interested in that number, which actually puts it at 98.2% as far as drops go. So it is currently the third worst drop off from its opening weekend of films that at least made $175 million. But what's interesting is the fact that Endgame made twice that amount basically in its opening weekend. So that's kind of expected to see that kind of drop. And Captain America Winter Civil War also did much better in its opening weekend as well, and so it makes a lot more sense as to why that film dropped off in this way. This is a film that underperformed opening weekend, underperformed every following weekend after that, with massive drop-offs every single weekend, and now has gotten to the point of it being one of the worst performing. So that's why, to me, it's interesting that even Forbes.com and other sites like it are starting to cover these stories, are starting to cover these numbers and say there's no way to spin it. There's no way to spin these numbers because these numbers are coming in so much lower than what many people expected. The fact that Star Wars in its 7th weekend made $800,000 on a Friday, made so much less, is currently ranked below other films that came out this weekend. So again, obviously new releases are all you're going to do well, but the fact that this film has been out for a shorter period of time than a movie like Jumanji 3: The Next Level. Again, Jumanji's been out for 8 weeks. Rise of Skywalker has been out for 7 weeks, and yet that movie, Jumanji, made $6 million this weekend, had only a 22% drop, is still in 2,900 theaters. While Rise of Skywalker is now being pushed out of so many theaters, 600 this weekend, and I imagine that it'll be even larger next weekend because no one is going to see this movie. No one has a desire to see it. And when films like that, films like The Gentleman, films like Dolittle, which are movies that are, or at least for Dolittle is a flop. Dolittle is a film that's not going to make any money, and yet people are going to see that over going to see Star Wars again. I know some people are going to argue saying, but that's what happens. People don't see movies constantly over and over and over again. But you see, that's the problem. People used to do that with Star Wars movies. People used to see those movies over and over again so that when it was out this long, it would continue to do well. If you want evidence of that, go look to see what Rogue One did. Rogue One had twice the amount of money. And that's, I think, even before you adjust for inflation at the same time in its theatrical run. And that movie, by all accounts, was a success because people went to go see that film again and again. Because that's arguably what many people say is the best Disney Star Wars film that we've gotten to this point. So we're sitting now at this point in history where you have films like Gretel and Hansel, which is not going to be a box office bomb based on my estimates at this point in time, and films like The Rhythm Section, which even though that is going to be a loss, will have performed better than a movie like Solo: A Star Wars Story, and yet we have also one of the worst drop-offs in Star Wars history. This is all just, to me, speaks to the failures of Lucasfilm, the failures of Kathleen Kennedy, and also just the failures of Hollywood. I think that this completely, especially the fact that, as I mentioned, 2020 right now is in the red for new releases, especially because of Dolittle. The fact that Hollywood is in the red right now goes to show you that they are out of ideas. The ideas that they do put forward either suck, are woke, or some mixture of the two. And not even films like Sonic, which I'm excited for, I think are going to be able to save it at least this early on. Eventually we'll get, things like Black Widow. Eventually we'll get those animated films from Pixar. Eventually we'll get those movies, and those movies will indeed make money at the box office. But we're at a point in our history now where things are just not looking very good, and a lot of it, I think, stems from the fact that you had a completely underperforming Star Wars movie, and Disney, I think, needs to be very careful as it moves forward because it's going to have a major impact on the box office, whether it does well or whether it flops, because they pretty much own everything nowadays, and that's what's scary most of all. But anyway, let me know your thoughts about this. Do you think the rhythm section will somehow make it back? Will somehow, do well? Maybe it is doing well in the foreign marketplace. Maybe those numbers haven't come in yet, right, Odin? So maybe it did do well. Well, again, we still have to wait for those numbers to come in, but I highly doubt it. But let me know if you think that might happen. Also, are you surprised as I am that Gretel and Hansel is actually going to probably make its money back? And again, the fact that it costs $5 million to make, it's not that surprising. Again, I didn't have that number prior to this weekend. So last weekend, I didn't have the overall budget for that movie, but now that makes a whole lot more sense as to why a lot of the visual effects have been complained about as just not being very good, and the movie overall has been complained about just not being very good, but it just hits that standard beat. Again, it's a horror film featuring a creepy woman. Guess what? There, for some reason, are people out there, and you might know them, and you might be one of them, that anytime you see a trailer with any type of creepy woman in it, you have to go see it. There are people that just have to go see these movies. They're like, oh my gosh, I need to go see this movie at night because I want to get scared and I want jump scares and I want all this kind of stuff and adrenaline rush. And that's just how they get off, I guess. And it's sad because it's people like them that make movies like this with messages like this profitable. But let me know your thoughts about this and all the things we talked about in the comments section below. If you like this video, smash the like button, give me a subscribe, it helps me a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless. And now to give a shout out to my February Patreon and Subscribe Star members: Animation Commentator, Brian P., Dion, David Brobrizik. Please let me know if I need to repronounce that name. DivX, Elizabeth M., Enrique Evangelista, Father Christopher Miller, Frank the Tank and the Shawhan Weird Dog Clan, Harold Francis, The Hunky Chunky Funky Monkey, Inflamed Wood, Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jeffrey Toon, Jeffrey Lebowski, JJ Jonathan Jerembeck, Kenneth Cameo, Lady T, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, Orange Hat Reviews, Outpost Dyer, Perpetual Punster, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Steve Glasker, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, The DJD Show, and Tina B. And over on Subscribestar, Robert Revo, Larry, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, G2Cool99, Darkstar57, Alice McCarthy, US 888209 Fast, Dean Heiss, Harold Francis, J. Rod the Beer Guru, Nebanon G. Adams, and ZK Man. Thank you very much for being my Patreon Subscribestar members for the month of February. And if anyone else decides to join, at the next couple of days or so, I will add you into this list as well. You guys freaking rock. Have a wonderful one. And as always, God bless.